Happy February.
Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story, but before that, we are going to be doing the Bible. Then after that, we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kimberly. Then after that, we are going to be doing Dragon Drums with my mommy. Here's Dragon Drums. It's just a blue book.
Blue book.
Blue book. And then we will
Say hi, Granny Bear.
hi, Granny Bear. And you guys will be hitting the like button, subscribing, and hitting the bell.
Did they hear that? I don't see anybody liking this. You better say it again or they're not going to hear you. What did you just do to me? That wasn't nice.
Please hit the like button.
Oh,
Oh yeah. Subscribe
hi!
and hit
Rebecca
the bell.
says no. He's mumbling. See? Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Now we've got likes. Okay, so.
Hi, Becca. Bye bye.
All right, so we're going to read Psalm 9 and 10 today. Sometimes we need to do things till we get them right. So I'm going to read Psalm 9 and 10. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. Thank you, 3 people. I'm assuming that it's Rebecca, Mom, and Granny Bear. We've got 3 generations of ladies on the live stream. That's what it's called. Sorry. All right, I will stop trying to commentary because I can't commentary today, obviously. All right, Psalm 9, English Standard Version. To the choir master according to the Muth Leban, a Psalm of David. The Muth Leban, MUTH-LABBEN, with a little footnote next to it that says probably a musical term. All right, a Psalm of David. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. I'm going to start over again because I messed up the rhythm. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. I will recount all of your wonderful deeds. I will be glad and exult in your name. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. When my enemies turn back, they stumble and perish before your presence. For you have maintained my just cause. You have sat on the throne, giving righteous judgment. You have rebuked the nations. You have made the wicked perish. You have blotted out their name forever and ever. The enemy came to an end in everlasting ruin. In everlasting ruins, their cities you rooted out. The very memory of them has perished. But the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice, and he judges the world with righteousness. He judges the peoples with uprightness. The Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble, and those who know your name put their trust in you. For you, O Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you. Sing praises to the Lord who sits enthroned in Zion. Tell among the peoples his deeds, for he who avenges blood is mindful of them. He does not forget the cry of the afflicted. Be gracious to me, O Lord. See my affliction from those who hate me. O you who lift me up from the gates of death, that I may recount all your praises, that in the gates of the daughter of Zion I may rejoice in your salvation. The nations have sunk in the pit that they made, in the net that they hid. Their own foot has been caught. The Lord has made himself known. He has executed judgment. The wicked are snared in the work of their own hands. Higgaion Selah. The wicked shall return to Sheol, all the nations that forget God. For the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish forever. Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail. Let the nations be judged before you. Put them in fear, O Lord. Let the nations know that they are but men. Selah. Oh, Mom's got a definition. There we go. Occurring only in the title of Psalm 9, some interpret the words as meaning on the death of Laban, which must be a person, some unknown person. Others render the word on the death of the son, i.e. of Absalom, 2 Samuel 18:33. Others again have taken the word as the name of a musical instrument or as the name of an air to which the psalm was sung. Air not meaning breath, but air like musical style. So, all right, that's interesting. I don't know. All right, put your comment in the comments, which Mom has already done, if which one of those that you think is most probably what that is, according to the Muthleben for Psalm chapter 9. And now we are on Psalm 10. Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? In arrogance the wicked hotly pursue the poor. Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised. For the wicked boasts of the desires of his soul, and the one greedy for gain curses and renounces the Lord. In the pride of his face the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. His ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are on high, out of his sight. As for all his foes, he puffs at them. He says in his heart, I shall not be moved. Throughout all generations I shall not meet adversity. His mouth is filled with cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. He sits in ambush at in the villages. In hiding places he murders the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the helpless. He lurks in ambush like a lion in his thicket. He lurks that he may seize the poor. He seizes the poor when he draws him into his net. The helpless are crushed, sink down, and fall by his might. He says in his heart, God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see it. Arise, O Lord, O God, lift up your hand. Forget not the afflicted. Why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? But you do see, for you note mischief and vexation, that you may take it into your hands. To you the helpless commits himself. You have been the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and evildoer. Call his wickedness to account till you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations perish from this land. O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen their heart. You will incline your ear to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, so that man who is of the earth may strike terror no more. So I just want to mention real quickly, Psalm 10 obviously has some imprecatory themes in it, like when he says to break the arm of the wicked and evildoer in verse 15. And there's a big controversy about the imprecatory psalms. I wouldn't necessarily call this imprecatory per se, because some of the psalms are very... what an imprecatory psalm is basically you're wishing evil to be done, or justice, I guess, to be done to the evil people. And so it's sort of like you're saying, hey, God, you know, you've got these consequences that you're supposed to be following through with. Why aren't you doing that? Kind of thing. And so there's a lot of controversy about them sometimes. So go ahead and put your comment down there and say what you think about that. But I think that particularly this verse right here, break the arm of the wicked and evildoer, might not mean literally breaking the arm, but breaking the strength, because the arm represents the strength, especially of a nation that could wage war. If you break the arm, then the armies are going to not be effective against you. So go ahead and put your comment down like I asked, and I'm interested in what you have to say. All right, God bless you, and now we're going to go and have the synopsis. And don't worry, I'm going to run downstairs, but it's only to get my water bottle because I think I left it there. And I will be right back. Well, not on the video, but here's Kimberly. All right, bye.
So, right, we kind of did and didn't do the live stream yesterday. So what happened in the last chapter was the kids who are bullying Primer, they decided it would be funny to oil the stairs as he was going up them, or down. I forget which way. But he hit his head. He wasn't seriously injured, but he was knocked out, and then later on in their hospital, they took him over there, and so they said they were debating whether the stairs were greased or not because the kids cleaned it up, and it was too clean. So they decided, along with his very oiled boots, that he was pranked, except seriously, very seriously. And then they're gonna send him, when he recovers, to the next gatherer, partially to gather intel and partially to get away. And that's about it, right?
Yeah, that's about it. Hold on, stay right there. I'm gonna move this back a little bit because it's a bit close.
Yeah, Dad likes it very close.
Really close, and ooh, that's gonna fall out. Okay. I'm a little taller than you.
Okay.
Okay, that's good. My legs are longer. What can I say? Yeah. Okay, that's better. Yeah, I have really long legs. Okay. Sorry that we didn't read last night. I was not having a good RA day. So, we're going to start with chapter 6, and this is a really long chapter, so we'll probably only read about half of it. Granny Bear says, I think God knows what we think before we say it. To pretend to not be hurt or angry when talking to God is to not trust him with your heart, or to do the right thing in spite of your feelings. To do the right thing in spite of your feelings. That is interesting, because I had a conversation on the way home from youth group tonight with the kids about feelings versus thoughts, specifically about jealousy, because jealousy is an emotion, but your feelings and emotions can be controlled by your thoughts, so we can take every thought captive and be in control. All right, anyway, chapter 6. Pimer drifted in and out of sleep for the rest of that day and most of the next, immeasurably reassured and comforted by the presence of Rocky, or Lazy, and Mimic, who spelled the bronze fire lizard. If mentally fire lizards were with him, he reasoned, during the moments he drifted into consciousness, then Master Robinson couldn't be annoyed that he'd been stupid enough to fall and hurt himself just when the Harper needed him. For that was how Pimer construed the Harper's urgent query about his injury. He fretted, too, about what Clell and the others might do with his possessions until he saw his press against the wall beside his bed. His press is like a chest. The first time Sylvina appeared with a tray of food, he didn't feel like eating. You're not likely to be sick again, she told him in a low but firm voice, settling on his bed to spoon the rich broth into him. That was due to the crack you gave your head. You need the nourishment of this broth, so open your mouth. Too bad we can't numb-weed the inside of your head, but we can't. Never thought to see the day you weren't ready to eat. Now, there's the lad. You'll feel right as ever in a day or two more. Don't mind if you seem to want to sleep. That's only natural. And here's Rocky to keep you company again. Who's been feeding him? Don't sit up. Sylvina's hand pressed him back into the half-reclining position. You'll spill the broth. I suspect Siebel gave Mentally a hand. Not to worry, you'll be back at that chore soon enough. Pimer caught at her skirt, and as she made a move, there was grease on those steps, wasn't there, Sylvina? Pimer had to ask the question, because he couldn't really trust what he thought he'd heard. Indeed, there was. Sylvina frowned, pursing her lips in an angry line. Then she patted his hand. Those little sneaks saw you fall, scampered down, and washed the grease off the steps and handrail. But, she added in a sharper tone, they forgot they'd there'd be smeared grease on your boot as well. Another pat on his arm. You might say they slipped up there. Puns. For a moment, Pimer couldn't believe that Sylvina was joshing him, and then he had to giggle. There, that's more like you, Pimer. Now rest. That'll set you right quicker than you realize, and likely to be the last good rest you'll get for a while. She wouldn't say more, encouraging him to go back to sleep and slipping out of the room without giving him any hint to the plans for his future. If his things were here, he didn't think he'd be going back to the Drum Heights. Where else could he be placed at the hall? He tried to examine this problem, but his mind wouldn't work. Probably Sylvina had laced that broth with something. Wouldn't surprise him if she had. Complacent fire lizard chirpings roused him. Beauty was conferring with Lazy and Mimic, who were perched on the end of her bed. No one else was in the room, and then Beauty disappeared. Shortly, while he was fretting that no one seemed to be bothering about him, Mentally quietly pushed the door open, carrying a tray in her free hand. He could hear the normal sounds of shouting and calling, and he could smell baked fish. "If that's more sloppy stuff," he began petulantly. "'Tisn't. Baked fish, some tubers, and a special bubbly pie that Abuna insisted would improve your appetite." "Improve it? I'm starving," Mentally grinned at his vehemence and positioned the tray on his lap, then seated herself at the end of the bed. He was immensely relieved that Mentally had no intention of feeding him like a babe. It had been embarrassing enough with Sylvina. "Master Oldive checked you over last night when he returned. Said you undoubtedly have the hardest head in the hall, and you're not going back to the Drum Heights." Her expression was as grim as Sylvina's had been. "No," she added when she saw him glance at his press. "No more pranks. I checked, and I checked with Sylvina to be sure all your things are accounted for." She grinned then, her eyes twinkling. "Clell and the other dim glows are on water rations, and they won't get to the gather." Pimer groaned. "And why not? They deserve restriction. Pranks are one thing, but deliberately conspiring to injure, and you could have been killed by their mischief, is an entirely different matter. Only," and mentally shook her head in perplexity, "I can't think what you did to rile them so." "I didn't do anything," Pimer said so emphatically that he slopped the water glass on his tray. Rocky chirped anxiously, and Beauty took up the note in her trill. "I believe you, Pimer." She squeezed his toes with the poke, where they poked up the sleeping furs. "I do. And would you also believe that's why you had trouble? They kept expecting you to do some typical Pimer tricks, and you were so busy behaving for the first time since you apprenticed here, no one could credit it. Least of all Durzen, who knew all too much about you and your ways." She gave his toes another affectionate tweak. "And you, bursting your guts with discretion to the point where you didn't tell me or Sibyl what you bloody ought to have. We didn't mean for you to stop talking altogether, you know." "I thought you were testing me." "Not that hard, Pimer. When I found out that Durzen... No, eat all your tubers." And she snatched from his grasp the plate with the still bubbling pie. "You know I only like 'em hot. Eat all your dinner first. You'll need your strength and wits. You're to go with Sibyl to Nibelhold for Marin's gather. That'll get you away from here during Tilgan's singing, though he has improved tremendously, and no one at Nibel will be expecting any extra harpers. Not that they've all that much to sing about in Nibelhold anyway." "Lord Marin's still alive?" "Yes," Mentally sighed with distaste and cocked her head slightly. "You know, your bruises might just come in very handy. They're very purple and beautiful now, so they won't have faded." "You mean," and Pimer affected a tremulous whine in his voice, "I'm the poor apprentice lad whose master beats up on him?" Mentally chuckled. "You're on the mend." Later that evening, a dust-grayed, raggedy-dressed man peered round the door and shuffled slowly into the room, never taking his eyes from Pimer's face. At first, Pimer thought that the man might be the cot-holder looking for Master Oldive's quarters on the hall's second level, but the fellow, though initially hesitant and almost fearful in his attitude, altered perceptibly in manner and stance as he came closer to the bed. "Sibyl?" There was something about the man that made Pimer suspicious. "Sibyl, is that you?" The dusty figure straightened and strode across the floor, laughing. "Now I'm sure I can gain a discreet arrival at the Nibelhold gather. I fooled Sylvina too. She says you still have some rags that will be appropriate to the status of a rather stupid herder's boy." "Herder's boy? Why not? Come in handy, like the knowing of..." This is accented. Sorry. Okay, let me give this a good... I really can't. I can speak in an accent, but I can't read in one. It's just not on the fly. We'll try. Why not? Come in handy, like the knowing the way from the bluid, like. I don't get paid enough. As Siebel affected the speech mannerisms of the uprange herders, he became completely the nondescript person who had first entered the infirmary. Despite his chagrin at being told to resume a role he'd hoped never to play again, Pimer was enchanted by the journeyman's dissembling. If Siebel would do it, so would he. Master Robinson's not angry with me, is he? Not a mite. Siebel shook his head violently for emphasis. Kimmy swooped in, scolding because Siebel had made her wait outside. Then his expression became serious, and he waggled a finger at Pimer. However, you will have to watch your step with Master Oldive. We've sworn blue to him that this isn't going to be an energetic adventure for you. Even heads as hard as yours must be treated with caution after such a fall. So instead of hiking you in from Rotha Hold as I'd planned, and Siebel gave a mock scowl at Pimer's burst of laughter, Natan will drop you off at dawn in the valley before Nabol Hold. Then we'll proceed at the proper pace with beasts suitable for sale at the Nabol Gather. Why? Asked Pimer bluntly. Discretion had got him nothing but misery, confusion, and unwarranted accusations. This time he would know what he was about. Two things, Siebel said without so much as a pause for consideration. If it's true that there are more fire lizards in Nabol Hold, then is that what they meant? Is that who meant? Lord Otterell, at the hatching, I overheard him talking to someone, didn't know the man, and he said Marin gets more than he ought, and we have to do without. Didn't make sense then, but it would if Lord Otterell was talking about fire lizards, was he? He very likely was, and I wish you'd mentioned that snip of talk before. I didn't know you'd want to know it, and it made no sense to me then. Pimer ended on a plaintive note, seeing Siebel's frown of irritation. The journeyman smiled a quick reassurance. No, you couldn't have known. Now you do. We know that Lord Marin had his first fire lizards from Killara nearly 4 turns ago, so they could have clutched at least once, possibly twice, and he'd have made certain he had control of the distribution of those new eggs. Nonetheless, he has distributed more in Nabol than we can account for. What is equally important is the amount of other supplies that are being brought into the hold and disappearing. Marin's trading with the old-timers? Lord Marin, lad, and don't forget the title even in your thoughts. And yes, that's the possibility. And he's getting whole clutches of fire lizard eggs for trading him, as well as the eggs of his original pairs. Pimer was assailed by a variety of emotions. Anger that Lord Marin and Nabol Hold was getting more than a fair share of the fire lizard eggs when other, more worthy persons, Pimer included himself, ought to have a chance to impress the precious creatures. A righteous indignation that Lord Marin, and he slurred the title into an insult in his thoughts, was deliberately flouting Bendon Weir by trafficking in any way with the old-timers, and an intense excitement at the possibility that he, Pimer, might help discredit further this infamous Lord Holder. Those are two of the main things to listen for. The third, which is the most important in some ways, is which of Lord Marin's male heirs would be most acceptable to the craft and cot. He is dying, then? He'd been sure that the message to Master Oldive was spurious. Oh, yes, a wasting disease. Siebel's grin was malicious, and there was an unpleasant gleam in his eyes as he met Pimer's astonished gaze. You might say, a very proper disease to fit Lord Marin's peculiar ways. Pimer would have liked to have particulars, but Siebel rose. I must be away now, Pimer. You're to rest without getting into any mischief. Rest! I've been resting. Bored? Well, I'll ask Rokoyas to give you drum measures to learn. That ought to ease your boredom without taxing your strength. Siebel laughed at Pimer's snort of dismay. As long as it's Rokoyas, it will be. He's of the mind that you learned a great deal more than Durzin believes. Pimer grinned at the subtle question in Siebel's words, but before he could retort, the door was closing behind the journeyman, and Kimmy, who fluttered above him. Pimer hugged his knees to his chest, rocking slowly on his tailbones as he thought over all that Siebel had confided to him and tried to figure out what it was Siebel hadn't told him. Okay, so there's a break there. That's just a couple pages, so we'll keep going. One thing Siebel hadn't mentioned was how cold and how dark it would be when Natan collected him before dawn. Mentally, with Beauty and Rocky, had roused him from a fitful sleep, for he'd been afraid he'd oversleep and consequently spent a restless night. He could sense... I got 2 pages. Mentally, amusement as the two of them, guided by the encouraging chirrups of the fire lizard, stumbled across the dark courtyard towards the gather meadow. Then Leoth turned his brilliant jewel-faceted eyes in their direction, and they moved more confidently forward. Mentally giggled as she boosted Pimer up to catch the fighting straps, and then he felt Natan's downstretched hand and was aided into position. He heard her softly wish him luck, then she blended into the shadows, her actual position discernible only by 4 points of light that were fire lizard eyes. Do you want the fighting strap about you, Pimer? Night flying unnerves a lot of people. Pimer wanted to say yes, but instead took a good hold of the leathers that encircled Leoth's neck. He replied that since this was only a short trip, he wouldn't need them, then clutched convulsively as Leoth sprang upwards. They were above the rim of Fort Holder's fire heights before Pimer caught his breath. Natan gave the bronze dragon the audible command to Nabal, and Pimer knew he screamed into the nothingness of between. He choked off the noise as he felt the change from intense cold and blackness to frosty chill and the faint lightning in what must be the eastern sky. 2 whirling points of light danced above Natan's left shoulder, and a fire lizard's complacent chirp informed Pimer that Natan's bronze, Triss, had turned to look at him. Then Leoth swerved, and Pimer's fingers became numb as he increased the pressure on the straps, unconsciously leaning backwards against the angle of descent into darkness. Triss chirruped encouragingly, as if he were completely aware of Pimer's internal confusion. Pimer prayed fervently that Triss wouldn't inform Natan of how scared he was. Abruptly, the bronze dragon back-winged and settled with the lightest of bumps in black shadow. Leoth says there are people not far down the road, Pimer, said Natan in a low voice. Give me your flying gear. Isn't it Siebel? Asked Pimer, shedding helmet and jacket and thrusting them blindly toward Natan. Leoth says no, but Siebel is not far behind. He hears Kimmy. Kimmy? Pimer's surprise made him speak louder than he intended, and he winced at Natan's warning. You forget, whispered Natan. Siebel can bring Kimmy because fire lizards are so common here in Nabal. Or so we're led to understand. Displeasure colored the Fort Weir leader's amendment. Then Pimer felt the strong gloved hand curl about his wrist, and he obediently threw his right leg back over Leoth's neck ridge, sliding down the massive shoulder, aware as he slipped beyond Natan's guiding hand that the dragon had cocked his leg to allow an easier slope of descent. He let his knees take the shock of his landing and patted Leoth's shoulder, wondering as he did so if that were bold of him. Good luck, Pimer, Natan's muted voice just reached his ears. He stepped back, turning his head against the shower of dust and sand as the huge bronze launched himself skyward. Once his eyes were accustomed to the variations of black and dark gray, Pimer located the winding road and whistled softly as he realized how accurately the dragon had landed in the one flat area big enough to accommodate him. Pimer's respect for draconic abilities rose to new heights. He heard now the occasional sound of voices and saw the erratic wavering of light from the glow baskets of leading file, a creaking of wheeled carts, and the familiar sluff of plate-footed burdened beasts reached his ears. He looked about him for a place to hide. He had a choice of boulders and ledges, but found a shielded spot that faced the track, but gave him a clear view of the dimly seen exit. He curled up small, hugging knees to chest, secure in the belief that he couldn't be seen. A chirrup disabused him of that notion, and startled, he glanced up and saw 3 pairs of fire lizard eyes gleaming at him. Go away, you silly creatures! I'm not even here! To prove this, he closed his eyes and concentrated on the awful nothingness of between. The fire lizards responded with an agitated chorus. What's the matter with them? A gruff male voice called over the creaking of cartwheels and the shuffling sound of the burdened beasts. Who knows? Who cares? We most in a bow now. Pimer redoubled his efforts to think of nothing and heard the faint flutter of fire lizards taking flight. To think of nothing took more effort than to concentrate on something. A great many carts, too, Pimer thought, for Nabal gather when there was another, better one at Fort Hold. He opened his eyes now and saw the flicker of winging fire lizards in the gathering daylight, and the point lights of their eyes in gloom. And these were Carter's, Smallholder's. The anger that injustice roused warmed Pimer long after the caravan and the comfort of their glow baskets passed from his angle of vision. The cold dawn wind rose, and Pimer wished that Siebel would put in his promised appearance. He ought to have asked Natan if Leoth had seen Siebel as he glided in to his landing. Then Pimer chided himself that he was scarcely the first time he'd waited on his lonesome in the dark of dawn. He'd done his watches with his father's herds. Of course, there'd usually been someone sleeping in the cot within voice range during those long, slow hours. What if something had happened to Siebel, or he was delayed? Should Pimer go on to Nabol by himself? And how was he to return to the Harper Hall? He'd forgotten to ask Natan that, presuming it was the fort rear leader who'd collect him. Or was he to be collected? Did Siebel plan to sell those suitable beasts of his during the gather, or would they have to herd them back whence they'd come? There was a great deal that Siebel hadn't told him, in spite of the journeyman's candid explanation about their surreptitious appearance at Nabal Hold. Pimer relieved his anxieties by remembering that he wasn't going to have to attend the Fort Hold festivities, or listen to Tilgan sing music that Dominic had written for him. He sighed, depressed that he wasn't going to be singing the role of Lessa, that he wasn't still comfortable in his bed in his senior apprentice's dormitory, waking to anticipate the applause of Lord Grove's guests, the accolades of his friends and Dominic, and quite likely Lessa's approval, since the weirwoman was Lord Grove's special guest today. Here he was, cold, miserable, and uncomfortably aware that he hadn't had so much as a cold cup of claw before he was bundled onto a dragon's back and dumped here to wait a man who might not arrive for hours if he was walking a herd of beasts from Rotha Hold all by himself. And when they found out what they'd come to discover and returned to the Harper Hall, what would Pimer do tomorrow? He grinned, hugging his knees in smug satisfaction, remembering Rukoya's surprise the day before when he had perfectly dead-sticked the complicated message Rukoya's had thought up to test his knowledge of the drum language. Pimer was almost sorry he wouldn't be. He groped on the ground beside him and found a rock, gave it an experimental whack against the boulder that sheltered him. The resultant sound echoed about the small valley. Pimer found another rock and, rising, went to the now visible track. He beat the rocks together in the monotone code for Harper, adding the beat for where, grinning as the sharp staccato sounds reverberated. He repeated the two measures, then waited. He beat his measures again to give Siebel time to find his own rocks. Then, in the pause, he heard distantly a muffled reply, "Journeyman comes." Immeasurably relieved, Pimer was wondering whether to proceed down the track and intercept Siebel when he heard a stay as the message was repeated. He was a bit daunted by the stay, restlessly scuffed at the loose gravel on the track. Surely Siebel wasn't far away. What did it matter if Pimer did go to meet him? But the message had been clear: stay. And Pimer decided that Siebel must have a reason other than obedience to Master Aldive's instructions about Pimer's dented head. Suddenly, Pimer resumed his position behind the boulder, and none too soon. He heard, then, the sharp clatter of hooves against stone, the jangle of metal against metal, and a rumble of encouraging shouts. A fair of fire lizards arrowed about the graying southern skies, heading straight up the track. Pimer thought of cold betweens nothingness as the fire lizards, intent on keeping ahead of the swiftly pacing riders, swept on. The ground beneath Pimer's rump trembled with the runner's passage. There was so much dust raised that Pimer couldn't be sure how many rode by, but he estimated a dozen or more, a dozen riders with a full fare of fire lizards escorting them. Again, anger consumed Pimer. Pimer needs to get his anger under control, using his thoughts. Again, anger consumed Pimer. He knew that he wouldn't have resented this latest concentration of fire lizards, obviously companioning holders prosperous enough to own fast pacers, if the earlier caravan hadn't been just as well favored with the creatures. It wasn't fair. He agreed wholeheartedly with Lord Oterel. There were too many fire lizards abroad in Nabal. He was so incensed over such inequity, since the caravanners obviously hadn't appreciated the capabilities of the little creatures, that at first he didn't hear the schluff of the approaching herd. Kimmy's quizzical cheep nearly frightened him out of his wits. She cheeped again, apologetically, and her eyes whirled a little faster as she peered at him from the top of the boulder. "Well?" asked Siebel, appearing around one side. "You took me too literally." "They all have fire lizards," cried Pimer, too indignant to make polite greeting. "Yes, I had noticed." "I don't mean that lot," said, and Pimer jerked his thumb in the direction of the riders. "There was a caravan that had 2 or 3 full fares." "Did they see you?" asked Siebel, suddenly wary. "The fire lizards did, but no human paid any attention to their alert." Then Pimer caught sight of the beasts that Siebel had herded and whistled. "So, they meet with your approval." The leader had ambled past, eyes half closed against the dust, and the rest, nose to the tail in front, with eyes fully closed, followed. Pimer counted 5. All were well-fleshed, with good, thick, furry hides, moving steadily without a stumble, which meant their feet were sound. "You'll sell them all right," said Pimer. "Haben I will," said Siebel in proper accent, and passing his arm about Pimer's shoulders, urged him ahead of the herd. "Here," and Siebel passed Pimer a padded flask. "It should still be hot. I only broke camp when Kimmy told me Leoth had flashed by." Pimer mumbled his gratitude for the claw, which was hot enough to warm his belly. Then Siebel handed Pimer a dried meat roll for the sort that was standard journey rations, and Pimer began to view the imminent day in a much improved frame of mind. See, before coffee. Okay, we got to cut Pimer some slack there. Okay. As soon as he'd finished eating, he voluntarily dropped back to the apprentice's uncomfortable position at the end of the single file. He'd be properly coated with dust by the time they arrived at Nabel Hold. The first thing Pimer did when they got to the gather meadow was head towards the nearest watering trough, fighting against his thirsty charges for a space at the edge. He also remembered exactly where to pinch their noses to make them turn from him. "Our lad, let the beasts drink deep first." Siebel unceremoniously hauled him away, his voice angry, though his eyes twinkled as he warned Pimer to play the proper part. "Our sore tongue that dry can't move." 2 young boys were approaching the trough with pails, but they waited, as custom dictated, until the beasts had drunk their fill and the cold mountain water flowed clear again. Pimer and Siebel then herded their charges towards the area of the meadow set aside for animal sales. The hold steward, a pinched-faced man with a runny nose, all but pounced on them, demanding the gather fee. Siebel immediately protested the amount, and the two set to haggling. Siebel brought the fee down a full mark before he surrendered his token, but he didn't protest when the steward waved them contemptuously toward the smallest enclosure at the end of the rank. Pimer was about to object when Siebel's hand closed warningly on his shoulder. Looking at the journeyman in surprise, Pimer saw the imperceptible jerk of his head over his shoulder. Pimer waited a few discreet seconds and then casually glanced about him. 3 men had started to follow them towards their allotted space. A thrill of fear made Pimer catch his breath until he recognized the unmistakable herder gait and knew these were prospective buyers. "Tolia I'd suitable beasts, d'ya know?" drawled Siebel under his breath. "Ar, and you'll drink the profit again, like as not," replied Pimer in a sullen tone, and his shoulders shook with the effort to control his amusement. He hadn't a single doubt in his mind that Siebel would also play the happy drunken herdsman to perfection, and managed to say without offense what would be impossible for a sober man to any place. They got the beasts enclosed, and Pimer was sent with a worn mark of the herdsman's craft hall to haggle for fodder. He managed to save an eighth of the dealing, which he pocketed as any apprentice would. Siebel was already deep in bargain with one of the men, while the others were examining the beasts with pinch and prod. Pimer wondered where under the sun Siebel had managed to acquire such proper mountain-bred creatures, with rock-worn hooves and shaggy coats. He could no more account for the good flesh on them after this long winter than the prospective buyers, so he hunkered down and listened to Siebel's explanation. Trust a harper to weave words well, and Pimer's respect for the journeyman increased proportionately to the elaborations of the tale he told. Siebel would have his audience believe that he merely used an old trick handed down from grandsire to grandson, a combination of herbs and grasses sweetened with just the right amount of berries and well-moistened dried fruits. He also said that he and his did without sometimes to improve their beasts, and Pimer promptly sucked in his cheeks to look suitably haggard. He saw the eyes and the men linger on his bruises, showing yellow on his chin and cheek, while Siebel rambled on about his holders scrambling up and down the southern face of his hold hill to find the sweet new grasses that produced such spectacular results. The earnest knot of listeners attracted more, who stood respectfully back, but close enough to hear. What Pimer couldn't figure out was that while the beasts had very old marks of wrath and breeding, the secondary marks were also well worn. Then he was annoyed with himself. Siebel must have pulled this sort of stunt before. Undoubtedly, somewhere in Rotha was a cot-holder who kept a few special beasts for the Harper Hall's convenience. He began to relax and enjoy Siebel's tale-spinning thoroughly.
Sherlock Siebel.
The sun was well over the mountains by the time Siebel had struck hands on the bargains, for there were 3. One man bought 3 of the beasts, and the others 1 apiece, at what Pimer knew was a bloody good price. He wondered if that had covered their original purchase and their keep. Appropriately sober-faced during the bargaining, Siebel permitted pleasure to glow on his dirt-smeared face as he carefully stowed the mark pieces in his belt pouch, while the beasts were prodded away by their new owners. "Didn't think I'd make that much, but the trick always works," said Siebel in a low mutter to Pimer. "Trick? Sure," said Siebel softly as he patted dust from his clothing. "Arrived dusty early with well-fleshed beasts, and they're on to you fast, hoping you're tired enough to be stupid. Where did you get 'em?" Siebel flashed Pimer a grin. "Craft secret. Get along with you now," and he gave Pimer a wink and a rough shove. "See to the gather," he added in a louder tone. "A find thee when I wish to go." This wasn't much of a gather, Pimer decided when he'd done one round of the small nestle of stalls. They didn't even have bubbly pies at the baker's, and the Craft Halls had obviously sent very junior men to represent them. Still, a gather was a day to be enjoyed, and not many were held at Nabol, even when rest days were thread clear, so the Nabolese were making as much of the occasion as they could. The wine man was doing a brisk trade by the time Pimer returned that way. He squatted at the corner of the stand, munching slowly away at another meat roll, listening to comments and noticing with deep chagrin and the growing wrath how many fire lizards flitted about, resting for a moment on the stall tops, wheeling up in fares to dance in the air a bit before settling on their friends' shoulders or on a new position where they could overlook. At first Pimer tried to convince himself that he was only seeing the same group again and again. He did notice that most were greens with a sprinkling of brown and blues, the lesser fire lizards. When he saw bronzes, they were always on the shoulder or arm of the more prosperously dressed. Yet no matter how Pimer argued the matter in his mind, it was clear that Nabol Hold boasted more fire lizards than he had seen even at Benton Weir during the impression. Suddenly a phrase stood out from the murmurous conversations about the wine stand. "There'll be a few more happy holders today, I hear." Pimer turned to scratch his shoulder fiercely and located the man who had spoken from his knowing smirk, a smirk from his clothing. His companion, a miner, by his shoulder badge, was nodding in comprehension. A smith from his clothing. "Nabol don't take proper care of 'em, he don't. 3 never shelled. My master was fair upset about that. Means to have 3 more today, or his name's not Kaljan." "So, is that so?" The smith bobbed his head up and down to show regret. "We'd 1 that didn't hatch too, but no joy did we get above. Eggs we was promised, and eggs we was given. Up to us to care for 'em proper enough to make a match. That one," and his head jerked towards the Hold cliff to indicate Lord Merrin, "enjoys putting a snake among the wherries." He snorted derisively. "Happen it's his only pleasure now." Both men guffawed with malicious delight. "Happen he'll not need to worry about him much longer, I hear tell." The smith winked broadly at the miner. Couldn't be soon enough for me. We'll see. You at the dancing? Good. Going so soon? Had my glass. Must get back. A disappointment in the miner's face made Pimer think that the smith's departure was precipitous. Going to tell his master about the eggs that were up at the hold, was he? Pimer decided to tag along. Eggs handed out in quantities, eggs that had been badly handled and wouldn't hatch. Unless, and Pimer reflected over something that Meneley had said once about fire lizard eggs. Green fire lizards laid eggs as well, having been fertilized by a mating flight with a blue or brown, sometimes even a bronze. But green fire lizards were stupid. They'd lay a clutch, 10 at the most, Meneley said, and leave them with such a shallow covering of beach sand that they were easy prey to wild wherries or sand snakes. Very few green-laid clutches survived to hatch, which, as Meneley had succinctly stated, was just as well, or Pern would be up to the eyeballs in little green fire lizards. Pimer wondered if anyone in a bowl realized that a deception was being practiced on them, and green fire lizard eggs were what were dispersed so lavishly. Then he realized that he lost sight of the smith, and cursing his inattentiveness, began to retrace his steps, turning with assumed idleness to peer between the stalls. He spotted the smith, urgently speaking to a man with a smithmaster's badge, and as the man reacted to his journeyman's excited words, his master's chain sparkled. Pimer managed to duck away as both men suddenly turned towards him. When they had passed him on their way to the hold, Pimer followed, restlessly scanning faces in the hopes that he might see Siebel and tell him what he'd overheard. Siebel might wish to investigate. As the two smiths turned from the gather area towards the hold, Pimer had to pause or be noticeable. The smiths strode purposely up the ramp towards the main hold gates. They were challenged by the guard, and after some moments of arguing, the guard summoned another from the gatehouse and sent him to the hold with the smith's master's message. While the messenger was gone, two men emerged from the hold, well wrapped in their cloaks, though the air had lost its chill. Something about the way they walked carefully, the way they carried their heads proudly, the way they nodded and smiled at the guards smugly, and most of all the way they pointedly avoided contact, struck Pimer as significant. He continued to watch them as they turned towards the gather meadow. As they approached him, he caught sight of their figures in profile and realized that each man carried something hidden in his cloak, held tight against his side. It couldn't have been a large object, but thought Pimer, putting expression, manner, and profile together. An egg pot wouldn't be large. He wanted to follow the men to see if his suspicion was correct, but he also didn't want to leave the hold until the message from the smithmaster had been answered. A new party, holders by the look of them, now made themselves known to the guards and were admitted to the angry chagrin of the smithmaster. Then 3 carts, heavily laden to judge by the straining of the burdened beasts struggling up the ramp, forced the smithmaster to one side. The guard waved the carts toward the kitchen courtyard. The last cart jammed a wheel against the ramp parapet, the driver thudding his stick against the burdened beast's rump. "Wheel be jammed," yelled Pimer, not liking to see any animal beaten for what was not its fault. He jumped forward to help guide the carter. The man now backed his stolid beast, swinging its head left. Pimer, setting his shoulder to the tailgate, gave a push in the proper direction. He also tried to peek under the covering to see what on earth was being delivered to the hold on a gather day when most business was done in the gather meadow. Before he could get a good look, the cart had picked up speed as it reached more level ground. He was past the guards, arguing with the smith and paying no attention to the procession of carts. Ducking quickly to the side of the cart, away from the carter, Pimer gained access to the hold proper. As the carts rumbled on into the kitchen court, Pimer rapidly wondered how he could turn this opportunity to advantage and remain in the hold after the carters had unloaded and left. Certainly, if he was actually in the hold, he might find out more than he could possibly learn wandering about the gather. If nothing else, he could discover what the carter had delivered. Then he spied a line of coveralls bleaching in the spring sun. He darted over and removed one, ignoring the slight dampness as he slipped it over his head. Kitchen drudges were never noted for cleanliness, and once the beast's dirt and stains of his tunic were covered, the dust on his boots and trousers would be unremarkable. "Hey, you!" Pimer tried to ignore the call, but it was repeated and could only be directed to him. He turned towards the speaker, affecting a stupid expression. "I mean you, with the empty arms." Obediently, he trudged back to the carter, who slung a heavy sack across his back. At that point, the kitchen steward bustled out to supervise, and Pimer, bent double under the sack, passed him without a glance. The steward alternated between chivying his drudges out to help unload and the carter for his ill-timed arrival. The carter replied with equal heat that he had heavy carts and slow beasts and had to give way and eat dust from those hurrying to this bloody gather. Marin ought to be pleased he'd got here within the day allotted, much less at an earlier hour. The steward hushed him and began shouting ordering Pimer on to the back stores room. Pimer got inside the kitchen, not knowing where the stores rooms were, so making a business of wiping his face and easing his shoulders, he waited until someone brushed past him and turned down the proper corridor. "Don't know where I'm at. Put more as if plenty here already," muttered the drudge as Pimer followed him. "Atop them others," suggested Pimer hopefully. In the dim light of waning glows, the Nabalese peered at Pimer. "Never saw you afore." "Nor you haven't," Pimer agreed amiably. "Sent from to hold to help in the kitchen for to gather." "Oh!" And the sly gleam in the man's eyes suggested to Pimer that he had just let himself in for the worst and dirtiest of the chores about a hold on a gather day when the Lord was feasting guests. Haste appeared the vital factor in unloading the carts, so Pimer didn't see many of the seals on the sacks, barrels, and boxes he bumped out of sight. But he saw enough to realize that the delivery came from a variety of sources: tanner, weaver, smithcraft for the heaviest boxes, wine from many of the yards, but none, he was pleased to note, from Bendon. When the last bundle was stowed in the now bulging storerooms, Pimer's sigh of relief was echoed by Bessel, the sly drudge, who had managed to stay close to him during the unloading. Pimer had no sooner lowered himself to a sack to rest than the man snatched him to his feet. "Come on, we've no time to rest today." Nor did Pimer, who was set first to scrape out ashes from secondary hearths and then to gutting beasts and wild fowl, thankful that he'd watched Camo often enough at the task to know the tricks. He scoured extra plates encrusted with dirt and grime of turns until his fingers shriveled. When he'd done that and peeled a dragon load of tubers, he was allowed to a breather so long as he kept one of the 5 spits turning. Chaos broke loose when the hold steward arrived to inform the kitchen that Lord Marin chose to eat in his own quarters, and these were to be prepared while he walked the gather. The kitchen steward obsequiously took the change of order. Mom, what does that mean? OBSEQUIOUSLY. Obsequiously. Vocabulary, people. Took the change of order, having only that hour completed the first arrangements in the great hall. The moment the heavy door had swung shut on the hold steward's back, however, he burst into obscenities that won Pimer's astounded approval. If Pimer had thought he'd worked hard already, he was soon disabused of that notion by the rate at which he was sent flying about the kitchen to collect cleaning and polishing tools and preparations. Then he was sent on ahead with Bessel and a woman to start cleaning the Lord's rooms. Already weary from an early rising and more hard labor than he'd known since he'd left his native cot-hold, Pimer tried to cheer himself by imagining Master Aldive's reaction to his quiet day at Nabal Gather. "Who'd have thought he'd walk to gather?" the woman was saying as they trudged up the steep steps from the main hall to Marin's apartment. "Had to. Didn't you hear what they be saying about at gather? Marin dead already, and none know his heir. Some is want to turn gather day into duel day." That remark set both Nabalese into cackles of laughter, and Pimer wondered if he could be ignorant enough of hold problems to ask why they were so amused. "I saw 'em comin' in, I did," said Bessel again, with that sly, knowing expression on his face. "Every one of 'em was with them some time today, they was. Outside with him now, shouldn't be wonder. He'll have his little game with 'em, he will, each thinking he's been named. said the woman, and dug her elbow into Bessel's ribs, which sent them both off into malicious laughter again. Hope it's not just as it has to do all the cleaning here, Bessel said, putting his hand on the door handle. Hasn't been done in... Faugh! He turned his head away, coughing against the stench that wafted out to them from the open door. As the smell reached Pimer's nostrils, sweet, cloying, sickening, he felt his stomach turn in protest and tried not to inhale. He hung back, hoping the fresher air of the corridor would cleanse the room of its stink. Here you get in and open shutters. You're used to stinkin' messes, gutting men. Bessel grabbed Pimer roughly by the arm and propelled him violently into the room. How Pimer managed not to vomit from the odor of the room before he reached the shutters and flung them open he didn't know. He half threw his body up the deep sill, gasping in fresh, cool air. Other windows too, boy, ordered Bessel from the doorway. Pimer filled his lungs and opened the other windows, staying by the last until the chill air dissipated the odors of decay and illness, and Lord Marin's heirs had to attend him in this funking atmosphere. Pimer spared them a moment of sympathy. Then Bessel shouted for him to go into the other rooms and open them up to air properly, else no one would eat his food like as not, and we 'em to clean up their messes. The foul odor hung heaviest in the last of the 4 rooms that comprised the Lord Holder's private apartments in Nabul. It was then that Pimer blessed the happenstance that had sent him in here ahead of the others. Reposing on the hearth were 9 pots of exactly the size in which fire lizard eggs were placed to keep warm and harden. Mastering his urge to gag, Pimer ducked across the room to investigate. One pot was set slightly apart from the others, and lifting the lid, Pimer scraped enough sand away to see the mottled shell before he covered it carefully over. He took a quick look at the contents of the first pot in the other group. Yes, the egg was smaller and of a different hue. He'd wager every mark he owned that the separate pot contained a fire lizard queen egg. Quickly, he switched pots. Shielding his actions with his body in case Bessel ventured thus far to check on him, he dumped the sand with deft speed into the cinder shovel, removed the egg, and shoved it under his coveralls and into his shirt above his belt. Poking among the cinders, he selected one that had a slightly rounded end and neatly inserted it into the egg pot, replacing sand and lid, and stood the rifled pot back in line, straightening up just as the woman crossed the threshold. That's the lad. Tend the fire first, and you'll need to bring up more black rock from the yard. He likes his warmth, he does, she cackled again as she roughly pushed carven chairs out of her way to sweep under the work table. To be sure, he'll feel the cold soon enough, he will. Bessel joined in her laughter. The fire was hot as Pimer shook the grate free of ashes, and his face burned by the time he had cleared the debris. The heat also warmed the egg lying against his ribs. Hurry it up, you gutting men, said Bessel when Pimer began to lug the heavy ash bucket out. No slouching, or I'll take my hand to you. He raised a big fist, and Pimer ducked away, feeling the egg pinch his skin and worried he might crack it prematurely. As he strained with the heavy bucket down the long steps, he wondered how ever was he going to keep the egg safe. Certainly not on his person, and he'd have to keep it warm too, as well as in some place to which, in his guise as a lowly guttingman, he'd have easy access. The solution came to him just as he was about to dump the ashes. He checked the swing of the bucket and glanced about the ash pit. Then, very carefully, he emptied the ashes in a pile just to the left of the ash pit opening. Anyone emptying ash buckets tended to fling the contents to the back wall, where the cinders spread downward from the top of the accumulated pile. The molding on either side of the opening kept ashes from tumbling back into the courtyard until the pit was full. Its capacity was by no means reached at this moment. With his booted toe, Pimer made a small depression in the warm ashes, quickly inserted the egg, covered it first with warm ashes, then with a coating of cold cinders to insulate it. Glancing at the sun as he filled his bucket with fresh black stone from the dumps next to the ash pit, Pimer saw that the sun was lowering. which was mercy, he thought, lugging the black stone back to the hold, because he wondered if he'd managed to last through the most arduous day of his life. They'd have the feast soon, more than likely as soon as Lord Merrin returned to the freshened quarters. What caused that noxious stink? Certainly not Master Oldive's medicines, for the healer believed in fresh air and freshening herbs, which at their worst were pungent, but could not cause the odor in Lord Merrin's rooms. No matter, once the Lord and his guests were served, the drudges would get what remained on the serving platters, and that would mean everyone could relax for a while. He could perhaps sneak away then before Sibyl got anxious, and did he have a lot to tell Sibyl. Half the workers in the hold were now running up and down the steps, pursued by the strident voice of the hold steward, who had arrived to direct the freshening. Pimer was promptly given another ash bucket to empty and fill with black rock. On his way back through the kitchen this time, he sneaked a bread roll, which heartened him considerably. By some miracle, they were just about finished when a messenger arrived from the guard to say that Lord Merrin and his guests were returning. The steward shoved and pushed everyone else out, even to the point of collecting abandoned cleaning tools. As the last of the drudges scurried back into the kitchen, the laughter of the returning gatherers was heard on the hold doors. Pimer had to assist the cook turn the roast for carving, and nearly had his fingers sliced thinner when the cook caught him taking bits that dropped to the table. Then he had to mash endless kettles of tubers. As fast as a dish was served up and garnished, it was dispatched above. At one point, Pimer thought he might be sent, but it was decided he was much too dirty to carry food. Instead, he was sent to the bowels of the hold for more glow baskets, as Lord Merrin complained that he couldn't see to eat. Pimer had to make 3 trips to satisfy the need. By that time, the platters were coming back to the kitchen. The drudges had lesser stewards stripped food off as he passed them by. The kitchen began to quiet as mouths were stuffed too full to permit speech. Pimer managed to secure a meat-rimmed bone, and grabbing a handful of the sliced breads, he retired to the darkest corner of the huge room to eat. He applied himself ravenously to his food, having decided to leave as quickly as possible now. The sun had set during the furor of serving the feast, so he had to cover the darkness to retrieve his egg. He'd have the excuse for the guards, if they stopped him, that he was finished with his duties. Lord Grow always gave his drudges time to attend the gather dancing. Pimer was looking forward to encountering Sibyl again. He might not have heard much to the point of which air the hold staff preferred, but he had proof that Lord Merrin was getting far more fire lizard eggs than a small hold like Nabal ought to receive, that his storerooms were full of more supplies than he and his could ever use in a full pass, much less a turn. Hungry though he was, Pimer couldn't finish all the meat on the bone. He was too tired to eat, he thought, and before he did collapse from exhaustion, he'd better retrieve the egg and slip out to meet Sibyl. How he longed for his bed at the Harper Hall. The regular kitchen drudges were too busy grumbling about the poor selection left for them to eat, and how much those blinking guests were eating and drinking, to notice Pimer's deft exit. He took possession of the precious egg, warm to the touch, and wrapping it carefully in a wad of rags, thrust the bundle once again under his tunic. He jauntily approached the main gates, whistling deliberately off-key. "And where do you think you're going?" "To gather," Pimer replied, as if this was all too obvious. He was as surprised by the man's guffaw as he was by being swung around and roughly propelled back the way he had come. "Don't try that one on me again, gutting man," called the guard, as the force of his push sent Pimer stumbling across the cobbles, trying not to fall and damage the egg. He stopped in the darkest shadow of the wall and stood fuming over this unexpected check to his escape. It was ridiculous. He couldn't think of any other hold in all Pern where the drudges were denied the privilege of going to the hold's own gather. "Going back to the ashes, gutting man." It was then that Pimer realized his coverall, none too clean in the light, was still visible in the shadows, so he slunk past the opening into the kitchen court. Out of sight, he stripped off the betraying coverall and flung it into a corner. So he wasn't allowed to leave, was he? Well, the guests would have to be passed. He would simply bide his time and slip out of Nabal Hold the same way he'd gotten in. Taking heart in that notion, he looked about him for a suitable place to wait. He should remain in the courtyards where he would hear the commotion of leave-taking. He'd better not return to the kitchens, or he'd be put back to work again. His roving eye caught on the blackness that was the ash and blackstone pits, and that solved his problem. Keeping to the shadows, he made his way to the least likely of all hiding spots and settled on the spongy surface at the right-hand side of the opening to the ash pit. Not the most comfortable place to wait, he thought, removing a large cinder shell from under his tailbone before he achieved some measure of comfort. The night wind had picked up a bit, and he felt the chill when he poked his nose over the coping. Ah, well, he shouldn't have long to wait. He doubted anyone would tolerate Lord Maren's smell longer than absolutely necessary. He was awakened from a fitful doze by the sound of shouting and much running about in the main courtyard, and then a nearer, more frightening clamor in the kitchen itself. Above the shouts and slammings he heard a pathetic wail. "I dunno him, I tell yez. First time today I saw him. Said he was here to help to gather, and we needed help." Trust Bessel to clear himself of any blame, thought Pimer. "Sir, gate guard says a boy answering his description tried to pass out to the gather a while back. He couldn't say if the drudge carried anything about him. Wasn't looking for stolen items." "Then he didn't leave?" The voice was a snarl of fury. "Lord Maren?" wondered Pimer, and then realized that the unexpected had happened. The substitute in the egg pot had been discovered. There'd be no way he could creep out of his hold in the shadow of departing guests. With the way men were dashing about and lighting up every crock and corner of the courtyards, he'd be lucky to remain undiscovered. Some eager soul would certainly think to prod a spear through the ash pit just on the off chance, especially if Bessel remembered that he'd emptied ash buckets and might have hidden the egg there. Frantic now, Pimer glanced up at the walls about him. Carved from the cliff itself they were, and he could never climb straight up unseen. He caught sight of the rectangular darkness just above his head to the left of the ash pit. A window? To what? This side of the kitchen was devoted to stores rooms, but what window? The stores rooms were backed from the corridor side. No searcher would believe him able to open locked doors without a key, which the kitchen steward kept on a chain about his waist at all times. He couldn't ask for a safer hiding place, and if he closed the window behind him... He had to wait until the kitchen courtyard had been thoroughly searched, except for the garbage and ash pits. The shout went up that the thief must be hiding in the hold. The searchers swarmed back inside, and he leaped to the top of the ash pit wall. His fingers just reached the ledge of the window. Taking a deep breath, Pimer gave a wriggling jump and succeeded in planting both hands over the sill. It took every sinew in his body to secure that awkward and painful grip. He felt as if he'd scraped the skin from all his fingers as he clung and worked his body up until his elbows had purchased on the sill. With another mighty wriggle and kick, he managed to propel himself up and over, falling on his head on the topmost sack. Groaning at the pain of that contact, he twisted about and, reaching up, drew the shutter tightly but quietly across, barring the window. Then he felt the egg to be sure his fall had done it no harm. He tried to imagine this room from the perspective of the door side, but all the storerooms had seemed the same. He crouched in terror as he heard shouting in the corridor, someone rattling the bolts of the door. "Locked tight, and the steward has the keys. He can't be in here." They might just take a look, thought Pimer, when they didn't find him anywhere else. He crawled cautiously over the stacked bundles until he found one with enough slack at the top to admit him. He opened the thong, and just as he was crawling in, wondered how under the sun he was going to tie it up again. The stitching at the side began to give in his hands. Smiling happily at such a solution, he rapidly undid the stitching down the side. Crawling out, he retied the knot about the mouth of the sack, then slid through the undone seam, which, once inside, he could do up slowly, but enough to pass a cursory inspection. It was hard to do, feeding the thick thread through the original holes from the inside, and his hands and fingers were cramped when he finally accomplished the feat. He was in a sack of cloth bales, and despite cramped confines, he was able to wiggle down between bolts so that he was standing on the bottom of the sack, and both he and the egg were cushioned on all sides by the material. Between fatigue and the scant supply of air in the sack, he found his eyes drooping and surrendered to the combination of exhaustion exhaustion and safety, he fell fast asleep. And we will get to the rest tomorrow.
What?
Okay. Because cliffhangers are awesome.
They are not.
Yeah, they're awesome.
They're horrible.
Okay. And I think we will say good night.
I didn't fall asleep.
You didn't fall asleep. Yay.
JJ
Okay.
didn't either.
Good night, everybody.
No, JJ didn't either.
Sweet dreams.